We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down. Let my people go.
Hello and welcome to episode 89 of the Croydon Constitutionalist podcast, bringing classical liberalism to South London and beyond via our YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. Well, we recently held a public meeting in Purley where we were joined by Dr Jan Macvarish, the Education and Events Director of the Free Speech Union. What follows is a recording of our chat. Well, hello and welcome everybody to the Whispers Bar here in Purley for the next event of the Croydon Constitutionalists. We have a very special guest this evening who I will be introducing shortly. The format for the evening will be a sort of chat between myself and my guest for approximately 30 minutes. Then we'll have a short intermission in which you will all pay the beer tax, and then we can have a Q&A. So our guest this evening is Dr Jan Macvarish. Jan is a researcher, writer and lecturer. She has a PhD in sociology and has a strong interest in family life. She has conducted research into sibling relationships and the law, into contemporary family living, teenage pregnancy and parenthood, the regulation of fertility treatment, and the use and abuse of biological thinking. So we may discuss that in due course. Jan is the author of a book, Neuroparenting, the Expert Invasion of Family Life, and I know people are always keen to trust the experts in this room. And one thing I didn't know about Jan was that she set up and ran the Maverick Club.
You've been Googling.
I have indeed. She described herself as a roving club for masterless and unorthodox individuals. So I think it's fair to say you've come to the right place. But importantly for everybody here, since September 2020, Jan has been the Education and Events Director of the Free Speech Union. So, Jan, very much welcome to the Croydon Constitutionalists, our event this evening. So, Jan, you are the Education and Events Director at the Free Speech Union. What does that involve?
Well, I was recruited to the Free Speech Union in September 2020, so 6 months after we launched. And at the time it was lockdown, so there wasn't a great deal of need for an events director because we couldn't actually. The original intention was that events would be sort of speakeasies in pubs all around the country for members to get together, sort of modelled actually on the Vote Leave gatherings that used to happen around the country. But obviously in the first year or so, maybe even longer, God, it's difficult to even think about it, most of our events kicked off as online events with the odd sprinkling of comedy nights that we were able to do because we work with Comedy Unleashed, which is a kind of comedy collective that works in a club in East London. But since then, we do basically at least 2 events a month for our members. So we've now got, I think it's just under 12,800 members of the Free Speech Union, and part of their membership entitles them to discount memberships to all of the events that we do around the country, and free attendance at our online events, and then we also produce videos of those events that then now people can watch behind the members' paywall. So we do everything from debates. So we did a debate in London about the introduction of buffer zones outside abortion clinics, something that we had a divided opinion on within the Free Speech Union actually. So we decided to reflect that in a debate with kind of speakers on each side. We have also done events in Scotland on the hate crime legislation. We're about to do another one up there on that. We've explored the arts. We had a big event with Nigel Farage in central London about the debunking issue. And I'm just doing a series at the moment on the new conformities around the way in which sort of racism, anti-racism has become a way in which people's speech is regulated. That was the first in the series. We're then doing one on LGBTQ++, etc., and how that's become a way in which people's speech is regulated, particularly in the workplace. And so we're kind of, and then I've got 3 events on science coming up at the moment as well, which are looking at how the case for science can be made and how science and its reputation has been corrupted in recent years, and we need to defend it. So the idea is really to provide stimulating events for members, to kind of build a community on the ground, and then to produce content that can be shared with members and other people and promote the organisation and sort of reflect this idea of nothing being beyond debate, really.
Excellent. So you mentioned there are a couple of issues around things like the Scottish hate crime bill, etc. Can you tell us about some of the campaigns that the FSU has been running?
Well, really early on we were involved in writing research papers about the Scottish hate crime bill to start with. I suppose the largest legislative campaigning areas of our work have been the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Bill, which has now gone through, is now an act. But when we started, that was really central to the work that we were doing, and it's only now being implemented. So we now have Arif Ahmed, who's in charge, a great guy from Cambridge University, who is in charge of running an office to which will be reported any instances that breach academic freedom on university campuses. So it's a real kind of breakthrough, and we'll see when the first cases start to come to light there about where academics' free speech and students' free speech is being thwarted in some way by student unions or by university management. What else? The online safety bill was central to work we were doing as well, and we had obviously, so the eye-opener for me on the legislative side of things, is not something I've been involved in before, is just how kind of laborious this process is and how in Parliament you have to be. So we have a Director of Parliamentary Affairs who basically works with Toby all the time to try to just intervene in debates and to work with peers that we know that are friendly, with MPs who are concerned about free speech, and it's just incredibly intricate. I had no idea that that's how things worked, and in some ways it's encouraging, in other ways it's quite depressing that you realise these processes that the public is very largely locked out of. But we try to bring the public in, so we have these campaigning tools where we encourage people to write to their MPs on particular issues. So on our website we've got a very simple tool where on a particular issue we'll encourage people to locate their MP, and then we'll help them with a kind of pro forma letter which they can then adapt using their own words if they want to. And I looked up today actually, and we've had over 10,000 emails have been sent to MPs by our members on various campaigns and petitions. So we've taken up debanking. What else? Conversion therapy is something that we've been very involved in here and north of the border, which is this proposed legislation that would outlaw, ostensibly it looks like a good thing, it's apparently about outlawing conversion therapy for people who are gay. So the idea that people are kind of being pretty much psychologically tortured by churches or mosques or whatever, that's what people have in their mind when they think that's what that bill's about. Actually, it's going to have an effect on therapy, on parents, on schools, because it incorporated in it at the moment will be just very ordinary conversations with young people who are exploring their sexuality or their gender. So as we all know, with the kind of gender and the trans issue at the moment, there is no settled consensus as to how you should advise young people that are troubled. But what this will do, we think, will shut down conversations that are absolutely necessary for the way in which young people will be guided through those pathways. So those are some of them. What else? There's the other side of campaigning, which isn't necessarily directly legislative. So at the moment we've got a petition running, but a campaign where we're encouraging people to submit subject access requests to Premier League football clubs. So I don't know whether you've heard about this Lindsay Smith case. So she was a Newcastle United fan, lifelong fan, who had been tweeting about the trans issue, and Newcastle United decided that she should no longer be allowed to attend football matches. There's no connection between her tweeting and her behaviour in the ground, absolutely nothing. And when we looked into that, we discovered that the Premier League had actually been providing information to Newcastle on Lindsay's social media output. It was very shocking. So we then have asked members to, and we've made it easy for them to submit subject access requests to other clubs. I'm not quite sure what the results of that are, but we're hoping to sort of find out what's going on across the board. So there's loads of things that we do.
No, that's
sorry.
That's very interesting, because you would never have thought that they were doing that. So you mentioned the case there with the Newcastle fan. Obviously, the Free Speech Union is, in principle, what it says. It's a union. It's a membership organisation. So what interesting cases of the FSU been involved in where they've been defending somebody's right to free speech?
Yeah, so we're not a trade union in law, we're a non-profit organisation, and that was partly because, largely because if you're a union, there's restrictions on what you can and can't do. And so we thought we'd be more free. Equally, we're not a charity either, because that also would place with restrictions on what we do. So the model we've got is that we kind of offer a service which is rather like a union. We offer that solidarity, support, expertise in workplace representation that unions should be doing, but nowadays they rarely are when it comes to the kinds of issues that we get involved in. So the kinds of cases, so a very large number of our cases now concern the gender trans issue. So they are people in workplaces and in civic life as well, actually, who have questioned the idea that trans women are women. So they've basically said men are men and women are women. And nowadays that can be enough to get yourself into trouble in your workplace, or to lose your funding bid, or to have your theatre production blackballed, you have your student meeting shut down. So there's just the number of ways in which people can be silenced is just extraordinary. And in our casework, we basically kind of prop people up who are utterly devastated to have been accused of something that they thought was reasonable speech. So there's a kind of a proportion of people who stumble into a situation. They've tripped over a tripwire they didn't even know was there. And then there's other people who, because they are actually aware of what the tripwires are, they're trying to claw back territory, if you like, whether that's in public life or in the workplace. And for example, they see coming down the line that their workplace is going to ask them to add their pronouns to an email, or that they should submit themselves to critical race theory training about white privilege, or that their bathrooms may well become gender neutral bathrooms. And so they ask us preemptively, how do I raise this and object to this in my workplace? And so sometimes we're doing preemptive work with people, but very often we're also then taking things through from initial threatened disciplinary proceedings, actual disciplinary proceedings, all the way through to employment tribunals, and then up from there. So we do a lot of work in-house, because we've got a growing case team and a heavy-duty legal team. And then we've also got a very large team of supportive lawyers who do pro bono work or mates rates work for us, because they believe in free speech.
Excellent. I know, some of you may not have had to go through any of these things, but there's a lot of the diversity, equity and inclusion workshops or compulsory training sessions that people have to go on now. Yeah. Fortunately, with my current employer, I don't have to do that. But I have experienced such things in the past.
But they can occur everywhere now. So it can be you're a parent in a school, you're involved in civic life, you're a local councillor, you're on the board of an arts organisation. It can just occur in so many different settings. I'm trying to think of examples that really are way beyond the workplace, where these things, people that might be involved in a football club, like Lindsay Smith, but even at an even local level, people involved in organised civic organisations, where they then get kicked off. So there's a woman I think was involved in a crafting organisation, and she was kicked off the board because of stuff she'd said about the gender issue. Well, I'm emphasising the gender issue because that's those are the ones that I know most about, I suppose. But there's also things around race, as well as cases where people have raised really, really reasonable objections to the kind of new thinking around what anti-racism means. And these are people who are anti-racist. They're not racists. I can't think of a case where we've actually represented somebody who is actually racist, although we would if they hadn't broken the law. They're people who are devastated to be accused of racism because they themselves think they're not. So it's the effect of on people of those kinds of accusations is really, really devastating.
Oh, absolutely! It's probably the worst thing you can be accused of these days, from a career perspective, let alone anything else. So, this is Free Speech Union. Why do you think free speech matters in this day and age?
Well, I think it matters in every day and age, but it's under threat in different ways in different ages. I mean, for me, the reason why it matters is fundamentally a democratic one, because I just fundamentally don't see any difference between me, you, and those who govern or rule. So I think that there is no reason to think that there is anybody above me who should decide what I can and can't read, think, see, discuss, watch. I've always thought that. So I've never had this sense that there should be any kind of paternalistic protection. Now, obviously, we can turn things off, not open the book, not go to that debate, whatever. We can avoid the things we don't want to see. But I think fundamentally that in a democratic society, everybody has to be trusted to take responsibility for what's out there in a democratic society. And once you start to chip away at that and say, well, actually, we need to protect people from this, we need to deny people that, you end up with an authoritarian situation. And so fundamentally for me is just this, it's about preserving and reinvigorating democracy. And I have a very strong sense of indignation when anybody says, we can't trust people. We shouldn't trust people to access this or see that. And I think years ago I would have probably thought about that more in terms of the media and culture, whereas now it's obviously occurring in really different ways where, like the examples we're talking about in the workplace, where people on the one hand are told they should bring their whole selves to work, and the work should be a place of everywhere is appropriate for activism, but that doesn't actually mean political activism where you can air political views that are diverse. It means you have to comply with this view, and this is the view of your employer. I mean, it's extraordinary, which is kind of, old-fashioned left-wing politics should have been resisting that, and it's been completely useless. And in fact, it's opened the door for this incredible authoritarianism, I think.
Indeed, you say there about having different views. Obviously, you've got quite an academic background. How do you feel about the lack of diverse thinking in some areas of academia? An area where people should be coming up with ideas and challenging each other. How do you feel about that?
It's funny actually, because when I first, I didn't experience academia as being like that. I mean, it was obviously, you don't really get conservative academics in the field I was in, which was the field of family. And so, it was quite difficult in some ways to engage with conservative arguments for the family because it wasn't being reproduced in academic work. You'd have to kind of quote a conservative think tank or a conservative commentator. And there was a very snooty attitude amongst a lot of academics and a sort of clubbiness where people assumed that everybody agreed with them. But at the same time, you could, certainly, early 2000s, you could still have a debate about these things. But then over time, when I was in academia from sort of 2001 till 2016, and by the time I left, it was just really obvious that you could no longer. There were active campaigns to monster academics who did not agree they weren't even conservative academics. So, a friend of mine who was a liberal academic, so she was an expert in law, and she wrote a paper about rape. And she was arguing that actually the justice system doesn't actually do that badly when it comes to prosecuting rape, which is counter to all of everything we're told. But she was comparing rates of prosecution in rape cases to other prosecutions, and she was saying, well, actually, it doesn't compare that badly, counter to the current narrative. And she was also defending juries, because one of the ideas that was becoming very popular was the idea that juries were just prejudiced against women in rape cases. And there was this prevalent view that women were asking for it, and that they would ask questions about what women were wearing. And she found, through her research, there was no evidence this is what juries thought, and that it wasn't affecting prosecutions. It was actually that rapes are very, very difficult to prove. And because she published that paper, radical feminists went for her, and they said it shouldn't have been published. They tried to get her sacked from her professorship at the London School of Economics. She was invited by the LSE, to their credit, to take part in a debate with 4 speakers, people on both sides of the arguments. People tried to get that debate shut down, and it was just, I was so shocked by that. It was really early. That was probably 2015, maybe 2014, 2015, and I just was so horrified by that, because she was so obviously a reasonable person and an academic with integrity. And these other academics couldn't tolerate her existence within the academic community, and they used everything to try to go for her. And those kind of experiences just really make you realise how vicious people can be when they cannot tolerate an idea that's different to their own. And that idea is not an academic one; it's or an intellectual one. It's just political.
Indeed, it's the antithesis, really, of what they're supposed to be about, isn't it? Which is quite shocking. So, in terms of your academic career, you've specialised in the family and single living and parenthood, and sort of doing research into that. What do you think the state of the family is in Britain these days?
When I wrote my book, the way I approached that was to think about, or to ask the question, what are we thinking when we raise children? So obviously there's all kinds of different formulations, not formulations, but arrangements by which children can be raised. And if you look at history, children have been raised in all kinds, the nuclear family does not go back that far. Children have had aunties, grandmas, grandpas raising them around their parents. The kind of one mum, one dad model is not. It's not that it was the norm in the sense of it was affirmed, and I think is very important in a kind of moral way and a psychological way for society. But actually on the ground, I'm sure if you go back in your own families, you will find quite strange arrangements going on, where children can be parcelled out to other family members, even non-family members, going back a few generations, where women have been widowed very young and then married again, or not married and shacked up with somebody. You've got all these kinds of arrangements. The family norm was actually on the ground quite flexible. So in that sense, I don't necessarily think that looking at how we're actually doing it in terms of who's living with whom and how we're doing child rearing is necessarily the thing that gives you the answers as to what the state of the family is. Yeah. I think there's the state of the family in the sense of what the state does and how the state affirms and helps marriage and helps couples and helps people to raise children. And then there's what we think we're doing when we're raising children. So on that side of things, which might seem a bit of a weird question, but if you think about raising children, you have to acknowledge, in order to do it properly, that you are an adult and they are a child, and that I think nowadays that isn't necessarily an obvious distinction that everybody feels all the time. You also have to feel that you have to perform being an adult in order to do that job properly. And you have to recognise and understand what a child is. So nowadays, a lot of people think that children are the source of all wisdom, and that what we have to do is watch them really closely so that they reveal themselves to us in their full individuality. So that's how you can get this idea that there might be a trans child or a gay child It's this idea that somehow if you have to just watch them really closely and give them total freedom, and then they'll reveal themselves to you in this kind of butterfly way, whereas actually humans have never raised children in that way. That's completely new. The way we've done it is we've said, okay, society believes this, and children need to be raised this way, and this is how we'll do it. And within that, again, there's been this flexibility, but society has to understand what it needs to do in order to raise children. And so I think the big problem we have at the moment, the most fundamental problem we have, is that we don't recognise that adults need to have authority over children in order to raise them in a way that is truly allows them to flourish, and that is kind to children, that recognises their limitations, and recognises the job of developing them into social beings, not just individuals. And all of those kind of really deep problems are the ones that I'm most interested in, really, rather than who's living with whom and how long for.
Sure. So is there anything that, dare I say, the government or just, civic society could do to support parents in sort of moving in that direction and raising their kids?
I think it could not infantilise parents. So things like banning smacking, which is what's happened in Wales and Scotland, I think is a really, really bad move. It could well happen over in England as well. I think that's a really stupid thing for a government to do, because it's not because I'm a big fan of beating children, but because I think that the intention of it is to say that adults shouldn't have that degree of authority over the children, that they actually are theirs. And in fact, that idea that children are yours is also being undermined. So this idea that children are kind of held in common by everybody has become enacted in law as well.
I don't know whether it went through in the end, you'll know better than me, but in Scotland, didn't they want to sort of, every child got assigned to them a government guardian or something?
Yes, that's right. It was overturned in the end, but after a long fight by very good campaign groups up there. It was called the named person scheme. So it meant that every child born within Scotland would be assigned a person who would be employed by the state, who would be their guardian, which has never happened before. Again, a completely novel arrangement. And they would be on a par with parents, because their sort of legal status would be not anything to do with family law. So parents have a lot of rights in family law, but if you introduce this other framework, it just takes away from what the responsibility that parents need to feel for their children. Yeah, it was very worrying. I think it could easily rear its ugly head again as well.
That is craziness.
Well, you might notice if you've had kids in the last, 20 years, that letters from school say "Dear Caregiver." It doesn't say "Dear Parents" or "Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so." It says "Dear Caregiver." And it's part of this kind of neutralisation of the parental role, where you spread it around. But actually, we all know that ultimately, the only people that really, really will care and love for children are their family members. Ideally their parents. If the parents are gone, then it may be grandparents, but it's got to have that. Children have to belong to a family. They can't belong to the state. It doesn't work.
No, interesting stuff. Well, obviously you're part of the FSU. People here tonight might be interested in it. You said you've got a membership. It's a membership organisation. You put on events and support members. How can people get involved with the Free Speech Union?
Yeah, so, basically, I don't know how many different arms there are to what we do. So when I joined, there was, 5 staff, and most of us weren't full-time, and now there's 19 of us, largely full-time. And so what membership gives you is, the bottom line, I suppose, is it's almost like an insurance scheme in some ways. So if you think you might get into trouble, or if you do get into trouble for speaking your mind, or asking difficult questions even, we will try and find a way to support you if you come up against the law or other kinds of regulations. That's the kind of bottom line sort of insurance scheme, if you like, side of it. Most people will probably never use it, so most people are like any insurance. The other aspect of what we do is that people have a weekly newsletter. So we've got a lot of people who can write really well, who work for the organisation. We have a weekly newsletter written by our social media guy called Freddie Attenborough. It's a proper piece of writing, you know, it digests the free speech news of the week, comes out every Friday, so people really enjoy reading that. Like I said, my events are at least a couple of months in London, online, around the country as well. And then what else? We do briefing papers, we do FAQs papers, so if you want to arm yourself with your rights, members have access to our FAQs. We are just continually lobbying and trying to change the agenda in the media. So I think when I first started, we could sort of get things placed in the Telegraph. Now we can get things placed in the Times, the Mail, the Express. I don't think we've yet had something placed in the Guardian, but I heard Toby on Radio 4 today, this afternoon, not talking about free speech, but nevertheless, we're sort of battling to try to raise our profile. We're on GB News a lot. Free Speech Nation basically usually has one of our staff members or one of our cases on most Sunday evenings under Andrew Doyle's show. So I do think we have actually made a really big difference in 4 years by just trying to open up this question of free speech and redefining it, where it was something that was a bit dead. On the one hand it was dead, and on the other hand it was maligned. So people that supported it, it was a little bit of a principle that still hung there, but it was a bit dead. And on the other hand, there were people that were actively maligning it as something that you only wanted if you were a bigot. And so I think we've really turned the tide quite successfully on that by saying, look, this is what's actually going on. These are the kinds of cases. It's not just old fellas who want to mouth off about immigration. It's women who think that blokes shouldn't be in women's toilets. It's it's all kinds of issues, and people are asking reasonable questions and they're being shut down. So that's what we stand for, and I think that's what we've really. I'm impressed by what we've done because it's my colleagues. I mean, just extraordinary. We've attracted really brilliant people.
No, very much so. And what's the best way that people can contact the Free Speech Union? Is it the website?
Yes, just go to the website and there's a join page, or I can sign you up tonight if you want to join. I actually have my payment terminal with me with my vouchers.
Dangerous stuff.
I know. Well, why not? So it's what is it? For discount membership, which is for students, retired people, it's $29.99 a month, I think it is now. And then a year. Sorry, 29 is only a year. Sorry, $4.99. I'm looking at this. It's $4.99 a month, and that's the starting rate, and then it goes up to sort of $49.99 a year for the full rate. But for that, you get access. I mean, now we've just got a new website that launched a couple of months ago with a lot of content that's paywalled. So we're just putting more and more resources into that so that people can have a sort of membership environment as well as the services that we've been offering already.
Yeah. Sounds good. Well, I'm sure that the assembled here this evening will have some questions for you after the beer break. But we'll just end this part of the evening now. Thank you ever so much for coming and talking to us.
Thanks, Dan.